Captain Lee Donghae stood at the viewing window of the human transport ship as it approached Nexus 7. The massive space station looked like a crystal flower blooming in the darkness of space. Its towers and rings sparkled with lights from 1,000 different alien species. This was humanity's first official visit to the Galactic Council, and Donghae felt the weight of representing his entire species. Behind him, Lieutenant Park Jin-woo checked his weapons one last time. The alien diplomats had already sent several messages about human security protocols. They found it strange that humans still carried what they called primitive kinetic weapons. Jin-woo's belt held a standard projectile pistol, and his rifle used simple bullets instead of the energy weapons that every other species in the galaxy preferred. "Captain, we're getting another message from the station," said Communications Officer Han Ji-sung from his seat at the control panel. His young face showed concern as he read the incoming text. "They're asking us again to leave our weapons on the ship. They say their security systems might see our guns as a threat." Donghae turned from the window and walked to Jin-woo. His security chief was a calm man who had served in Earth's military for 15 years. Jin-woo never complained about the alien messages, but Donghae could see the frustration in his friend's eyes. "What do you think, Jin-woo?" Donghae asked. "Sir, our weapons are part of standard diplomatic security protocol," Jin-woo replied. "Every Earth ambassador has the right to armed protection. If they have a problem with bullets, that's their issue, not ours." Dr. Kim So-young looked up from her research tablet. The xenobiologist had spent months preparing for this meeting, studying every known alien species in the Council. She was excited to meet them in person, but she also understood the political importance of this moment. The alien cultures see energy weapons as more civilized, she said. Their records show that most species stopped using projectile weapons thousands of years ago. They think we're backward. "Backward?" Jin-woo laughed, but there was no humor in his voice. "My rifle will put a hole in anything, organic or mechanical. Their fancy laser guns need power cells, cooling systems, and computer targeting. My weapon works in any environment, needs no power source, and never overheats." "That's exactly what they don't understand," Dr. Kim said. "They see complexity as advancement. Simple and reliable looks primitive to them." The ship's pilot announced their final approach to the docking bay. Through the windows, they could see other diplomatic vessels from across the galaxy. Some ships looked like living creatures with smooth, flowing designs. Others appeared to be made of pure crystal or metal that shifted and changed shape as they watched. "Remember," Donghae said to his team, "we're here to prove that humanity deserves a place in galactic society. They already think we're primitive because we still use combustion engines and projectile weapons. Let's show them that simple doesn't mean stupid." The docking process took longer than expected. The station's systems had trouble understanding human ship design. Finally, they felt the gentle bump as their vessel connected to the docking port. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the human delegation stepped into Nexus 7. The corridor beyond was huge, designed to accommodate species of many different sizes. The walls seemed to be made of living metal that pulsed with soft light. The air tasted clean but strange, filled with scents from 100 different worlds. Their first guide was a tall, thin creature that looked like it was made of blue crystal. Its voice came from speakers embedded in the walls rather than from any visible mouth. "Welcome, humans," the crystal being said. "I am Coordinator Zel Nara. Please follow the designated path to the council chambers." As they walked through the station, they passed many different alien species. Some floated in bubbles of gas, others walked on multiple legs, and a few seemed to be made of living energy. All of them stopped to stare at the human group, especially at Jinwoo's weapons. "Look at those primitive projectile launchers," whispered. A creature that resembled a large insect. Its translator made its words understandable to the humans. "Do they really still use chemical explosives to propel metal fragments?" asked another alien that looked like a walking tree. "How quaint," replied a being made of flowing silver liquid. "My people used such crude weapons 10,000 years ago." Dr. Kim noticed that several aliens were taking pictures or recording videos of their group. She realized that humans would be seen as a curiosity, like a primitive tribe that had somehow learned to build spaceships. They entered a vast chamber where hundreds of alien delegates waited. The room was so large that the ceiling disappeared into darkness above them. Floating platforms held representatives from different species, each one adapted to their specific environmental needs. At the center of the room stood Ambassador Vexithera of the Zelthian Empire. The crystalline being was 3 meters tall and sparkled with internal light. When it spoke, its voice rang like musical chimes. "Honored council members," Vexithera announced, "today we welcome a most unusual species to our gathering. The humans have achieved faster-than-light travel despite their attachment to ancient technologies." The ambassador gestured toward Jinwoo's weapons with one of its crystal appendages. "As you can see, they still carry kinetic projectile weapons, much like our ancestors did in the early ages of civilization. It is remarkable that they have progressed so far while clinging to such primitive tools." Murmurs and sounds that might have been laughter came from the alien audience. Donghae felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his expression calm. This was exactly what they had expected. "We are honored to be here," Donghae replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "Humanity looks forward to learning from the wisdom and experience of the Galactic Council." "Indeed," Vexithera said with what seemed like condescension. "There is much you can learn. Perhaps you will finally abandon those crude weapons in favor of civilized energy-based systems." High Counselor Mordak floated forward on a cloud of purple gas. The being from the Vorthan Collective had no solid form, but its voice was deep and authoritative. "The Council will now vote on humanity's application for membership," Mordak announced. "Given their technological limitations, we propose granting them provisional status in the lowest tier of membership." Dr. Kim stepped forward slightly. "Counselor, might we ask why our weapons technology affects our membership status? We've proven capable of space travel, diplomacy, and peaceful contact." "Child," Mordak replied, the translator making his tone sound almost parental. "A species' advancement is measured by how far they have evolved beyond their primitive origins. Energy weapons are more precise, more powerful, and more civilized than throwing metal fragments at one's enemies." "Our weapons are reliable and effective," Jinwoo said quietly, but his words carried through the chamber. "Effective against what?" Vexithera asked with what sounded like amusement. "Against wooden shields and cloth armor, perhaps. But against modern defensive systems, your projectiles are useless." The vote was quick and unanimous. Humanity was granted the lowest level of council membership, with limited access to galactic technology and trade routes. They were assigned quarters in the oldest section of the station, far from the important diplomatic areas. As they were escorted to their rooms, Dr. Kim noticed something in the station's public databases. Several species that had once been council members were now listed as extinct. All of them had abandoned kinetic weapons in favor of energy systems centuries before their disappearance. She made a mental note to investigate further, But for now, she kept her observations to herself. Something about this pattern troubled her, but she couldn't yet understand why. The human delegation spent their first week on Nexus 7 attending orientation sessions designed for new council members. Captain Lee Dong-hae quickly discovered that these sessions were usually meant for species that had just achieved spaceflight, not those who had already established interstellar colonies like humanity. Their assigned quarters were in Section 7G, which Dr. Kim Soo-young learned was typically reserved for developing species and cleaning crews. The rooms were basic but functional, though the furniture was clearly designed for beings much different from humans. "They're treating us like children," Lieutenant Park Jin-woo said as he adjusted his sleeping platform for the third time. "These orientation videos are teaching us things like how to use a space toilet and why you shouldn't touch unknown alien food." Engineer Choi Min-ho looked up from his tablet, where he was reviewing the technical specifications the council had provided. "At least they're sharing some technology with us. Look at these energy weapon designs. The basic plasma rifle generates temperatures of over 50,000 degrees. "That's impressive," Jin-woo admitted. "But what happens when the power cell runs out in the middle of a fight? My rifle has 300 rounds and doesn't need a cooling period." Communications Officer Han Ji-sung returned to their quarters after attending a session on proper galactic communication protocols. His usually cheerful expression showed frustration. "They spent 2 hours teaching me how to say please and thank you in 47 different alien languages," he reported. "When I asked about establishing trade routes with Earth, they told me that was far too advanced for humanity's current membership level." Dr. Kim was reading through the station's historical archives, trying to understand more about Galactic Sea civilization. She found records going back thousands of years, showing the rise and fall of many different species. "Look at this," she said, gathering the others around her terminal. The Corvan Empire controlled 12 star systems for over 2,000 years. They were famous for their advanced energy weapons. Then, about 300 years ago, they just disappeared. Their worlds are empty now. What happened to them? Dongy asked. "The records don't say. It just notes that communication was lost and their territory was deemed uninhabitable. But here's the interesting part. In their early history, the Corvans used kinetic weapons just like us. They only switched to energy weapons about 500 years before they vanished." Choi Min-ho frowned at the data. "That could be a coincidence. Maybe they faced a natural disaster or a plague." "Maybe," Dr. Kim said, "but I found similar patterns with 6 other extinct species. All of them abandoned projectile weapons, all of them were considered highly advanced, and all of them disappeared within a few centuries of making the switch." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Vexathara and a group of alien scientists. The crystalline being's internal light seemed brighter than usual, which Dr. Kim had learned indicated excitement or amusement. "Greetings, humans," Vexathara said. "We have come to observe your primitive weapons technology. Our scientists are curious about how such ancient systems function." The lead scientist was a creature called Noxara, who looked like a floating brain surrounded by mechanical arms. Its voice came through a translator device that made it sound perpetually bored. "Show us these projectile launchers," Noxara demanded. "We wish to understand how you propel metal fragments without precision targeting systems." Jin-woo looked at Dong-hae, who nodded. The security chief drew his sidearm and, keeping it pointed safely away from everyone, demonstrated how to load and unload the weapon. "The projectile travels at approximately 400 meters per second," Jin-woo explained. It carries kinetic energy that transfers to the target on impact, causing damage through physical trauma rather than thermal or electromagnetic effects. Fascinating, said another scientist, a being that resembled a large moth with silver wings. But how do you account for wind resistance, gravitational effects, and target movement without computer assistance? Training and experience, Jinwoo replied. A skilled shooter learns to estimate these factors instinctively. The aliens exchanged what seemed to be amused communications in their own languages. Vexathara's light pulsed in a pattern that Dr. Kim was beginning to recognize as condescension. Such crude methods, Vexathara said. Observe a truly advanced weapon system. The ambassador produced a sleek device that looked more like a piece of art than a weapon. It was smooth and curved, with no visible moving parts. When activated, it hummed with barely contained energy. This is a standard Zelthian plasma projector, Vexathara explained. It uses magnetic containment to focus superheated gas into a coherent beam. The targeting system automatically compensates for all environmental factors and can penetrate most known defensive materials. The weapon fired a brilliant blue bolt that struck a target dummy across the room. The dummy simply evaporated, leaving not even ash behind. Impressive, Donghae admitted. What's the range? In atmosphere, approximately 2 kilometers with full accuracy, Noxara replied. In vacuum, the range is limited only by power supply. And how many shots can you fire? Jinwoo asked. This model can discharge 47 times before requiring a new power cell, Vexathara said proudly. What happens if you need a 48th shot? You would need to replace the power cell, which takes approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time in combat, Jinwoo observed. My rifle fires continuously until the magazine is empty, then takes 3 seconds to reload. But your projectiles cannot penetrate modern armor, the moth-like scientist pointed out. Energy weapons can be calibrated to bypass most defensive systems. Choi Minho stepped forward, his engineer's curiosity overcoming diplomatic caution. Could I examine the weapon's power system? I'm interested in the magnetic containment technology. Of course, Vexathara said. Perhaps you will learn to appreciate civilized weapons. As Choi studied the plasma projector, Dr. Kim continued her research into extinct species. She was finding more patterns that troubled her. Every vanished civilization had followed the same path. Early development with kinetic weapons, advancement to energy-based systems, and then sudden disappearance. Captain, she said quietly to Donghae, I think we need to be careful about adopting alien weapon technology too quickly. Why? What are you finding? I'm not sure yet, but there's a pattern in the historical records that I don't like. Species that abandon kinetic weapons seem to have a habit of going extinct. Donghae considered this information while watching the alien scientists examine Jinwoo's rifle with the same attitude they might show toward a stone axe. He was beginning to understand that humanity's primitive technology might be more important than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Choi Minho was discovering that the advanced plasma weapon had a problem the aliens hadn't mentioned. The magnetic containment system required constant calibration to prevent catastrophic failure. If the weapon was damaged in combat, it could explode with enough force to kill its user. This is very sophisticated, he told Vexathara diplomatically, but it seems complex. What happens if it gets wet or dirty? Water or debris would interfere. With the magnetic field, Noxara admitted, the weapon would shut down automatically to prevent dangerous discharge. So it wouldn't work in a rainstorm. Environmental protection gear would be required for optimal performance, the scientist replied stiffly. Jinwoo smiled grimly. His rifle had been tested in every environment from Arctic cold to desert sand. It would fire underwater if necessary, and mud wouldn't stop it from working. As the alien delegation prepared to leave, Vexithara made one final comment. We hope that observing proper weapons technology will inspire humanity to abandon these ancient tools. Perhaps in a few centuries, you will develop the wisdom to embrace civilized warfare. After the aliens left, the human team gathered to discuss what they had learned. Dr. Kim shared more of her research, showing them data on 12 extinct species that had all followed the same technological path. I think we need to be very careful about giving up our primitive weapons, she concluded. There might be a reason we're the only species that still uses them, and that reason might be why we're still alive. 3 weeks after their arrival at Nexus 7, Dr. Kim Soo-young received an unexpected opportunity. The Council's Archaeological Division needed researchers for an expedition to investigate ruins on a dead world called Kepler 442c. Most alien scientists avoided such assignments because the lifeless planets offered no chance for glory or advancement. It's perfect for us, Dr. Kim told Captain Lee Dong-hae. They think they're giving us busy work, but this could help us understand galactic history better. Dr. Yoon Tae-hyun joined the expedition as the human team's xenoarchaeologist. He was a quiet man who had spent years studying ancient Earth civilizations, and he was excited to apply his skills to alien cultures. The research vessel Meridian was a council ship designed for long-range exploration. Its alien crew treated the human passengers with polite indifference, clearly seeing them as junior partners in the mission. Kepler 442c had once been a thriving world, but now it was a gray wasteland under a dying red sun. The planet's atmosphere was still breathable, though it tasted of dust and decay. Ancient cities covered the surface, their spires and domes crumbling after millennia of abandonment. The progenitors built this world, explained Vexithara, who had joined the expedition to represent Zelthian interests. They were the most advanced species in galactic history. Their technology was so far beyond ours that we still don't understand most of it. What happened to them? Dr. Yoon asked as they walked through the ruins of what had once been a massive metropolis. Unknown, replied the expedition leader, a floating jellyfish-like creature called Morvek. They vanished approximately 50,000 years ago at the height of their civilization. Some believe they transcended physical existence. Others think they destroyed themselves through hubris. The human team worked alongside alien archaeologists, cataloging artifacts and mapping the ancient structures. Most of the progenitor technology was incomprehensible, but Dr. Kim noticed something interesting about the architecture. Look at these walls, she said to Dr. Yoon, pointing to deep gouges in a building's surface. These look like impact damage. From weapons? Dr. Yoon examined the scarred stone more closely. The pattern suggests projectile hits rather than energy weapon burns. As they explored deeper into the ruins, they found more evidence of ancient battles. Buildings showed signs of bombardment, and the streets were littered with fragments of metal and ceramic that might once have been armor or weapons. On their third day, Dr. Yoon made a discovery that changed everything. In the basement of what appeared to be a government building, he found a sealed chamber filled with progenitor weapons. Dr. Kim, you need to see this, he called through his communicator. The chamber was a perfect preservation vault, its environmental systems still functioning after 50 millennia. Inside, arranged on elegant displays, were dozens of weapons that looked both alien and strangely familiar. Those are railguns, Dr. Kim whispered, staring at devices that resembled oversized versions of human electromagnetic weapons. And those look like mass drivers. The progenitor weapons were beautiful in their complexity, but they were unmistakably kinetic systems. Electromagnetic launchers, projectile accelerators, and ammunition that ranged from simple metal slugs to sophisticated, guided missiles. Dr. Yoon activated his recording equipment and began documenting everything. These are definitely projectile weapons, but far more advanced than anything humans have built. Look at this firing mechanism. It uses magnetic fields to accelerate projectiles to incredible velocities. But why? Dr. Kim wondered aloud. If the progenitors were so advanced, why didn't they use energy weapons like every other species? Their investigation attracted the attention of the other expedition members. Vex Thara entered the chamber with several alien scientists, their expressions showing confusion and surprise. "This cannot be correct," Vexathara said, examining one of the progenitor weapons. "The most advanced species in galactic history would not use primitive projectile systems." Morvek floated closer to inspect the artifacts. "These weapons are clearly progenitor manufacture. The mathematical precision of their construction is unmistakable, but their design philosophy contradicts everything we know about technological advancement. Perhaps the progenitors were not as advanced as we believed," suggested Dr. Nexara, the brain-like scientist from their earlier encounter. "These primitive weapons suggest a species that had not yet learned to harness pure energy." Dr. Kim felt a growing certainty that the aliens were wrong. She had studied human military history extensively, and she recognized the signs of deliberate design choices. The progenitor weapons were not primitive. They were sophisticated tools built by beings who understood exactly what they were doing. "What if they chose kinetic weapons for a specific reason?" she asked. "What if energy weapons had some disadvantage we don't understand?" "Impossible," Vexathara replied firmly. "Energy weapons are superior in every measurable way. They are more precise, more powerful, and more efficient." But Dr. Yoon was finding evidence that supported Dr. Kim's theory. In a data storage device connected to the weapon displays, he discovered fragments of progenitor records. The translation systems could only decode parts of the ancient language, but the meaning was clear enough. "Listen to this," he said, reading from his tablet. "Warning protocols, energy-based systems, ineffective against something called void entities, or maybe quantum predators. The translation is unclear, but it sounds like they faced enemies that were immune to energy." "Weapons? Nonsense," Morvek declared. "No known material can be completely immune to directed energy. Even neutronium can be disrupted by sufficient plasma temperature." Dr. Kim continued exploring the chamber while the aliens debated the translation. In a corner, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a tactical display showing the final battle for this world, frozen at the moment the progenitors made their last stand. The display showed massive mechanical entities descending from space, consuming everything in their path. The progenitor defenses had thrown everything at these invaders: kinetic bombardments, projectile weapons, even what looked like nuclear explosives. Energy weapons were notably absent from the tactical readouts. "Dr. Yoon," she called softly, "I think I know what happened to the progenitors." He joined her at the display, and together they watched the simulation of the ancient battle. The mechanical entities moved through space like a plague, converting matter into more of themselves. They seemed unstoppable, absorbing energy attacks, without effect while being damaged only by physical impacts. "They lost," Dr. Yoon observed quietly. Even with all their advanced kinetic weapons, they couldn't stop these things. But they tried, Dr. Kim said. And they used the same type of weapons that humans still carry. That can't be a coincidence. Captain Dong-hae's voice came through. They're communicators. Kim, Yoon, we're getting reports of problems in the Outer Rim. Several monitoring stations have gone silent. What kind of problems? Dr. Kim asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Unknown. The Council is calling it a communication disruption, but Lieutenant Jinwoo thinks it might be something more serious. He wants us back at Nexus 7 as soon as possible. Dr. Kim looked at the frozen battle display, then at the progenitor weapons that had failed to save their creators. She had a terrible feeling that humanity was about to face the same test that had destroyed the most advanced species in galactic history. We need to take some of these weapons with us, she told Dr. Yoon. And we need to copy every piece of data we can find. The Council won't let us remove artifacts from an official archaeological site, he pointed out. Then we don't tell them, Dr. Kim replied grimly. Something tells me we're going to need every advantage we can get. As the expedition prepared to return to Nexus 7, Dr. Kim quietly secured several small progenitor devices and data storage units. If her suspicions were correct, humanity would soon discover why they were the only species that had never abandoned kinetic weapons. The answer might be the difference between survival and joining the progenitors in extinction. Communications Officer Han Ji-sung was monitoring the standard galactic communication channels when he first detected the strange signals. It was late in the station's artificial night cycle, and most of the diplomatic staff was sleeping. Han prided himself on being thorough, so he was running routine scans of the Outer Rim monitoring networks when his equipment picked up something that didn't belong. That's weird, he muttered, adjusting his receivers to get a clearer signal. The transmission was coming from beyond the galactic rim, from the empty space between galaxies where nothing was supposed to exist. The signal wasn't like anything in the databases. It had a mathematical precision that suggested intelligence, but the patterns were completely alien. Even more disturbing, the signal was getting stronger, which meant whatever was sending it was moving toward the galaxy. Han immediately contacted Captain Lee Dong-hae, who was reviewing reports from Dr. Kim's archaeological expedition. Captain, I'm picking up unidentified transmissions from outside the galaxy, Han reported. The signals are artificial, definitely from some kind of technology, but they don't match any known species. Dong-hae joined Han at the communications station, studying the wave patterns on the screens. How long have you been detecting these signals? About 2 hours. They started very faint, but they're getting stronger. If I had to guess, I'd say the source is approaching at incredible speed. Have you reported this to station security? I tried, but they told me to file a standard report and wait for the morning shift. They don't seem to think it's urgent. Dong-hae frowned. The aliens' casual attitude toward potential threats was something he'd noticed before. They seemed to believe their advanced technology made them safe from any danger. Lieutenant Park Jinwoo entered the communications room, drawn by the unusual activity. Problems, Captain? Maybe. Han's picking up signals from outside the galaxy. Something's coming this way. Jinwoo studied the data displays with the experienced eye of a military professional. These patterns look almost like machine code. Very precise, very repetitive, not like natural phenomena or normal communication. Over the next few hours, more monitoring stations along the galactic rim reported similar signals. Then the reports stopped coming entirely. Station after station went silent, their final transmissions cut off mid-sentence. This is getting serious, Dong-hae decided. Han, try to contact Dr. Kim's expedition. I want them back here immediately. But their attempts to reach the archaeological team failed. The communication networks were experiencing technical difficulties that nobody could explain. Han finally managed to get a message through to Dr. Kim using emergency frequencies, warning her to return to Nexus 7 as quickly as possible. 3 days later, the research vessel Meridian arrived back at the station. Dr. Kim and Dr. Yoon immediately briefed Captain Donghae on their discoveries while the alien expedition members filed their official reports. The progenitors faced something that was immune to energy weapons, Dr. Kim explained, showing him the data they had secretly copied. These tactical records suggest mechanical entities that could absorb or deflect directed energy attacks. You think the same threat is returning? Donghae asked. The timing is suspicious. 50,000 years since the progenitors disappeared, and now we're getting unknown signals from deep space. Their discussion was interrupted by an emergency announcement from High Counselor Mordak. All diplomatic staff were ordered to report to the main assembly chamber immediately. The Great Hall was filled with worried aliens when the human delegation arrived. Mordak's gas cloud form swirled with agitated patterns as he addressed the gathering. Fellow council members, Mordak announced, we face an unprecedented situation. 17 monitoring stations along our galactic border have lost contact with us. Long-range sensors show massive objects moving through the rim sectors, but we cannot determine their nature or origin. Ambassador Vexathara spoke from the crystalline delegation's platform. Our deep space telescopes have detected structures the size of small moons, but they appear to be artificial. They are consuming stellar matter and using it to replicate themselves. A wave of concerned sounds filled the chamber. Captain Donghae noticed that every species was reacting with fear, except for the humans, who were beginning to understand what they faced. What are our defensive options? Asked a representative from the Insectoid Thektar Collective. Standard protocol calls for energy bombardment of any hostile forces, replied Admiral Zephron of the Vorthon military. Our plasma cannons and particle beam arrays can destroy any known threat. Lieutenant Park Jinwoo leaned close to Captain Donghae. Sir, I recommend we request permission to investigate with a reconnaissance team. We need to see these things for ourselves. Donghae stood and addressed the council. High Counselor, humanity requests permission to send a scouting mission to gather intelligence on these entities. That would be inadvisable, Mordak replied. Your species lacks the technology necessary for such a dangerous mission. With respect, Counselor, our primitive technology might be exactly what we need. After considerable debate, the Council granted permission for a joint reconnaissance mission. The human team would be accompanied by alien military advisors and equipped with standard Council technology. The scout ship Endeavor launched 2 days later. Lieutenant Park Jinwoo led the mission, accompanied by Sergeant Kang Haiwan, a combat engineer who had joined the delegation as part of their expanded security team. The alien crew included Tactical Officer Nexlar, a warrior from a species that looked like armored reptiles. As they approached the outer rim, they found the first evidence of what they were facing. Monitoring Station Gamma 7 was still in its designated orbit, but it had been completely stripped of all technological components. Only the basic hull remained, like a skeleton picked clean by scavengers. Energy readings show massive discharges occurred here, reported Nexlar, studying his instruments. Our forces engaged the enemy with full plasma bombardments. Where are the wreckage and debris? Sergeant Kang asked. If there was a battle, there should be fragments of destroyed enemy vessels. Perhaps they were vaporized by our weapons, Nexlar suggested. But as they investigated further, they found evidence that contradicted this theory. The station's final sensor logs showed energy weapons striking their targets but having no effect. The mysterious entities had absorbed every plasma bolt and particle beam without taking damage. Then they encountered the enemy directly. The entity emerged from behind a dead planet like a nightmare-given form. It was the size of a space station, made of interlocking mechanical components that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. Its surface was covered with thousands of appendages that reached out to grab and consume any matter they encountered. "By the void," Nexlar whispered. "What is that thing?" "Contact!" Jinwoo called out. "Evasive maneuvers!" The entity launched smaller versions of itself toward their ship. The scout vessel's energy weapons fired automatically, striking the approaching attackers with concentrated plasma beams. The energy passed through the mechanical entities as if they weren't there. "Impossible!" Nexlar shouted. "Nothing can be immune to directed energy." "Our weapons aren't working," the pilot reported. "The entities are closing fast." Jinwoo made a command decision that saved their lives. "Switch to kinetic systems. Use the ship's emergency projectile defenses." The scout ship carried a few kinetic weapons for use against space debris and asteroids. These simple systems fired metal slugs using magnetic acceleration. When they struck the approaching entities, the effect was immediate and devastating. Tane. Mechanical attackers shattered under kinetic impact, their exotic matter unable to phase shift around physical projectiles. The fragments dissolved into basic particles, apparently unable to maintain cohesion after suffering kinetic damage. "How did you know?" Nexlar asked in amazement. "Lucky guess," Jinwoo replied grimly. "But we need to get back to Nexus 7 immediately. This is just the beginning." As they fled toward the galactic core, Sergeant Kang studied the sensor readings from their encounter. "Sir, I'm detecting hundreds of these entities throughout the rim sectors, maybe thousands." "They're heading for inhabited systems," Jinwoo observed, plotting their trajectory. "At their current speed, they'll reach the outer colonies within days." The scout ship raced back to Nexus 7 with the most important intelligence in galactic history. The entities that had destroyed the progenitors had returned, and energy weapons were useless against them. Only kinetic weapons could stop them. And humanity was the only species that still used such primitive technology. The galaxy's survival now depended on the weapons that everyone had mocked as obsolete. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering in the organization's history. Representatives from every member species had traveled to Nexus 7, their vessels crowding the station's docking bays. The great assembly hall buzzed with fearful conversations in dozens of alien languages. High Counselor Mordak's gas form swirled with agitated colors as he called the session to order. "Fellow council members, we face the greatest threat in recorded galactic history. The entities that destroyed our monitoring stations have now consumed 3 entire star systems." The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the devastation. Where the Kepler-88 system had once hosted 2 billion colonists, there was now only empty space scattered with the basic elements that had once been planets and stars. Ambassador Vexithara's crystalline form flickered with distressed light patterns. "Our military forces have engaged these entities 17 times. Every encounter has ended in complete defeat. Our most powerful weapons have no effect whatsoever." Admiral Zephyron of the Vorthon fleet floated forward, his gas cloud form darker than usual. "We have lost 47 warships and their entire crews. Our plasma bombardments pass through the entities as if they were made of empty space. Our particle beams are absorbed without causing any damage. Captain Lee Donghae stood to address the council. Honorable members, Lieutenant Park Jin-woo's reconnaissance mission discovered that kinetic weapons are effective against these entities. Simple projectiles can destroy them when energy weapons cannot. Impossible, declared scientist Noxara. No material can be selectively immune to energy while remaining vulnerable to kinetic impact. It violates basic physical laws. Dr. Kim Soo-young activated her datapad and projected the progenitor records for all to see. The most advanced species in galactic history faced the same enemy. Their tactical databases show that only kinetic weapons could damage these entities. The progenitors were destroyed despite having such weapons, pointed out Counselor Velthex of the Machine Intelligence Collective. This suggests that even kinetic weapons are ultimately ineffective. But they fought, Dr. Yoon Tae-hyun interjected. The battle records show the progenitors held out for months using projectile weapons. With energy weapons, they would have been destroyed in days. The debate continued for hours, while reports of new attacks reached the council. The entities were moving through the galaxy in a coordinated pattern, consuming everything in their path. Entire civilizations were being erased as if they had never existed. Lieutenant Park Jin-woo presented his tactical analysis to the assembled military commanders. The entities seem to be made of exotic matter that exists in multiple dimensions, simultaneously. Energy weapons interact with their three-dimensional component, but they can phase shift that component to avoid damage. Kinetic weapons affect their four-dimensional structure, which they cannot phase shift. This is theoretical. Nonsense, Admiral Zephron declared. Multidimensional matter is purely hypothetical. With respect, Admiral, your hypothetical enemies have destroyed 3 star systems, Dr. Kim replied coolly. High Counselor Mordak called for order as the arguments grew more heated. Regardless of the theory, we must address the practical reality. What options do we have? We could evacuate threatened systems, suggested Representative Morkex of the Thektar Collective. Evacuate to where? Asked Vexathara. These entities are consuming the entire galaxy. There is nowhere to run. Engineer Choi Minho stood and activated his own holographic display. I've been analyzing human weapons technology with the help of the progenitor data. We can retrofit alien ships with kinetic weapon systems. Primitive projectile launchers? Admiral Zephron's contempt was obvious even through the translation system. Our crews are trained on sophisticated energy weapons. They cannot be expected to use crude mechanical devices. Then they can learn, Captain Donghae said firmly, or they can die when their sophisticated weapons prove useless. The reality of their situation began to sink in as more reports arrived. The Nexar colony had been completely consumed. The Zelthian research stations were under attack. The entities were accelerating their advance, moving faster as they absorbed more matter. Communications Officer Han Ji-sung rushed into the chamber with an urgent message. Council members, we're receiving a transmission from the Outer Rim. It's from the entities themselves. The assembled aliens fell silent as the message played through the chamber's speakers. It was not words, but rather a complex mathematical sequence that the translation computers struggled to decode. Warning. Impedance detected. Kinetic resistance. Acknowledged. Acceleration protocols initiated. Consumption schedule revised. They know, whispered Dr. Kim. They know we've figured out how to fight them. What does acceleration protocols mean? Asked Mordak. Dr. Yoon studied the message structure with growing alarm. I think they're changing their tactics. They were taking their time before, processing each system thoroughly. Now they're going to speed up. His fears were confirmed within hours. The entities had been consuming one star system every few days, but now they were attacking multiple systems simultaneously. Their expansion rate increased dramatically as they abandoned careful processing in favor of rapid consumption. At this rate, they'll reach the galactic core within weeks, Admiral Zephyron calculated. We have no time to retrofit our fleets with primitive weapons. Then we use the weapons we have, Captain Donghae declared. Humanity's defense fleet is equipped with kinetic systems. We can fight them. Your entire species has perhaps 200 combat vessels, Vexathara pointed out. These entities number in the thousands. 200 ships that can actually damage the enemy is better than 10,000 ships that cannot, Lieutenant Jinwoo replied. High Counselor Mordak made the decision that would determine the galaxy's fate. The Council hereby grants emergency command authorization to the human military forces. All available resources will be placed at their disposal. The chamber erupted in protests from various species who objected to placing their fate in the hands of the primitive humans. But as more systems fell to the entities, opposition quickly faded into desperate cooperation. Admiral Nam Yoongi arrived at Nexus 7 3 days later with the entire human defense fleet. His ships looked primitive compared to the sleek alien vessels, but they carried weapons that could actually fight the enemy. Captain Donghae, Admiral Nam said as he reviewed the tactical situation, this is going to be the hardest fight humanity has ever faced. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy that destroyed a civilization far more advanced than ours. But we have something the progenitors didn't, Dr. Kim pointed out. We have allies. The entire galaxy is united against this threat. Allies armed with useless weapons, Admiral Nam observed grimly. Engineer Choi Min-ho stepped forward with a possible solution. Sir, I've been working with alien engineers to modify their ships. We can't install proper kinetic weapons in time, but we can jury-rig some basic projectile systems using their manufacturing equipment. How basic? Admiral Nam asked. Magnetic railguns firing metal slugs. No targeting computers, no advanced ammunition. Just kinetic projectiles at high velocity. Better than nothing, the Admiral decided. How many ships can we convert? Maybe 50, if we work around the clock and strip components from damaged vessels. As the retrofit work began, the entities continued their advance. System after system fell silent as the mechanical swarm consumed everything in its path. The galaxy was running out of time, and humanity's small fleet was the only thing standing between civilization and extinction. The final battle for galactic survival was about to begin, and it would be fought with the obsolete weapons that everyone had mocked as primitive. Admiral Nam Yoongi stood in the command center of Nexus 7, studying the holographic display that showed the enemy's advance. The mechanical entities had consumed 12 star systems in the past week, and their swarm continued to grow larger as they converted stellar matter into more of themselves. Show me what we have to work with, he told Captain Lee Donghae. The human fleet consisted of 217 vessels, ranging from heavy cruisers to fast attack boats. Every ship was equipped with kinetic weapons, railguns, missile systems, and projectile cannons that the galaxy had dismissed as obsolete. It's not enough, Admiral Nam said bluntly. Even if every shot hits its target, we can't destroy all of them. But we can hurt them, Lieutenant Park Jinwoo pointed out. That's more than anyone else can do. Engineer Choi Min-ho had been working continuously for 72 hours, leading teams of human and alien technicians to retrofit council ships with kinetic weapons. The work was proceeding faster than expected, but the results were crude compared to purpose-built human systems. "We've managed to convert 63 alien vessels," he reported. "The modifications are basic. Magnetic launchers firing steel projectiles. No guided munitions, no smart targeting systems, but they should be able to damage the entities." Weapons specialist Oh Mi-young joined the briefing, carrying datapads loaded with tactical analyses. "I've been studying the reconnaissance data from Lieutenant Jinwoo's mission. The entities have a weakness we can exploit." She activated her holographic display, showing the internal structure of the mechanical invaders. "They're not solid constructs. They're swarms of smaller units that coordinate through quantum entanglement. If we can disrupt the central coordination nodes, the entire entity should collapse." "How do we identify these nodes?" Admiral Nam asked. "They're the largest concentrations of exotic matter within each entity. They should show up on gravimetric sensors as dense spots in the swarm structure." Dr. Kim Soo-young had been analyzing the progenitor battle records, looking for tactical insights that might help them succeed where the ancient species had failed. "The progenitors made a mistake," she announced. "They tried to fight the entities in space, where the swarm could surround and overwhelm them." "Where else would you fight a space battle?" Admiral Nam asked. "Near a gravity well. The entities seem to have trouble maintaining cohesion in strong gravitational fields. If we can lure them close to a planet or star, their coordination becomes less effective." Dr. Yoon Tae-hyun added his own discovery from the ancient records. "The progenitors also found that the entities become more vulnerable after they've been feeding. When they're converting matter into more units, they have to lower their dimensional shielding." Admiral Nam studied all the data and began formulating a battle plan. "We'll make our stand at the Kepler 452 system. It has a large gas giant with strong gravitational fields, and the entities will need to process the planet's resources to continue their advance. That's only 3 days away from the galactic core," Captain Dong-hae observed. "If we fail there, the entities will reach the most populated systems. If we fail anywhere, the galaxy dies," Admiral Nam replied grimly. "At least at Kepler 452, we'll have gravitational assistance." The next 48 hours were a frenzy of preparation. Human crews worked alongside alien technicians to load every available projectile weapon with ammunition. The converted alien ships practiced basic firing drills, their crews struggling to understand targeting systems that required manual calculation instead of computer assistance. Sergeant Kang Haiwan led training sessions for alien Marines who would participate in boarding actions. The concept of fighting inside enemy vessels was foreign to most species, who preferred to destroy threats from a distance. "Remember," she told a mixed group of insectoid and reptilian warriors, "energy weapons won't work inside the entities. You'll be using explosive charges and kinetic firearms. Stay close to your human partners and follow their lead." Communications Officer Han Ji-sung established a communication network that could function even if the entities jammed standard frequencies. The system used quantum entanglement transceivers, ironically the same technology that the enemy used, for coordination. As the combined fleet moved toward Kepler 452, scouts reported that the entity swarm was indeed heading for the system. The mechanical invaders had detected the large gas giant and its abundant resources, making them predictable for the first time since their arrival. Dr. Kim made one final discovery that changed their entire strategy. While analyzing the entity, communication intercepts, she found references to something called a prime node, a master control unit that directed the entire swarm. "If we can identify and destroy the prime node, the other entities might become uncoordinated," she explained to Admiral Nam. It's like cutting the head off a snake. How do we find this prime node among thousands of entities? It should be the largest one, probably at the center of their formation, and according to the progenitor data, it will have the strongest gravitational signature. The human fleet arrived at Kepler 452 ahead of the entity swarm and took positions near the gas giant Kepler 452b. The massive planet's gravity well would provide the tactical advantage they needed, while its resource-rich atmosphere would attract the entities into their trap. Admiral Nam broadcast final instructions to the combined fleet. All vessels, remember that only kinetic weapons will damage the enemy. Alien ships are to focus on the smaller entities while human vessels target the prime node. Boarding parties will deploy only after the entities begin feeding and lower their shields. Sir, Captain Donghae asked, what are our chances? Admiral Nam looked at the tactical display showing their small fleet against the massive entity swarm, approaching the system. Honestly, we're probably all going to die, but we're going to take as many of them with us as possible. Lieutenant Jinwoo checked his weapons one final time. His rifle carried armor-piercing rounds designed to penetrate the toughest materials known to human science. If they worked against the entity's exotic matter, humanity had a chance. If not, the galaxy would fall within days. Engineer Choi Minho made last-minute adjustments to the jury-rigged alien weapons systems. The converted ships were crude compared to purpose-built human vessels, but they represented the galaxy's hope for survival. As the entity swarm entered the Kepler 452 system, Admiral Nam gave the order that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. All ships, weapons free. Let's show these things why humans never gave up kinetic weapons. The battle for galactic survival was about to begin, and it would be fought with bullets, missiles, and the stubborn human refusal to abandon technology that worked. The entity swarm entered the Kepler 452 system like a dark tide of mechanical death. Thousands of the creatures moved in perfect coordination, their exotic matter hulls rippling with dimensional distortions. At their center, the prime node loomed, like a metallic moon, easily 10 times the size of the largest human battleship. Admiral Nam Yoongi watched from the bridge of his flagship as the enemy formation approached the gas giant. All units hold position until they begin feeding. We need them distracted and vulnerable. The entities spread across the system, smaller units moving toward the planet's resource-rich atmosphere, while the prime node maintained position at a safe distance. As predicted, they began the consumption process, lowering their dimensional shielding to absorb matter from the gas giant. Gravitational distortions detected, reported the sensor officer. The entities are having trouble maintaining formation in the planet's gravity well. Now, Admiral Nam commanded. All ships, attack pattern Delta. Target the prime node with everything we have. The human fleet opened fire simultaneously. Railgun projectiles streaked through space at tremendous velocities while missile swarms launched from every vessel. The converted alien ships added their crude kinetic weapons to the barrage, filling space with steel projectiles and explosive warheads. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kinetic rounds punched through the entity's exotic matter hulls, causing massive structural damage. The creatures that had been immune to energy weapons began to collapse as their multi-dimensional forms were forced back into normal space. Direct hits on the prime node, called out weapons specialist Oh Mi-young from her station. Its coordination matrix is fluctuating, but the victory was short-lived. The entity swarm reacted quickly to the attack, abandoning their feeding operation and focusing on the human fleet. Waves of smaller entities launched themselves at the defending ships, their mechanical forms shifting into attack configurations. Evasive maneuvers, Admiral Nam ordered. Don't let them get close enough to board us. The human ships scattered, using their superior maneuverability to stay ahead of the entity swarm. The converted alien vessels were slower and less agile, making them easy targets for the mechanical invaders. Captain Lee Donghae watched in horror as the Zelthian cruiser Bright Star was overwhelmed by a cluster of entities. The alien crew's energy weapons were useless, and their improvised kinetic systems couldn't fire fast enough to stop the attack. "Admiral, we're losing the converted ships," he reported. "The alien crews can't adapt to kinetic warfare fast enough." "Then we make every shot count," Admiral Nam replied grimly. "All human vessels, focus fire on the prime node. Ignore everything else." Lieutenant Park Jinwoo led a squadron of human destroyers in a daring attack run directly at the massive prime node. The huge entity was defended by hundreds of smaller units, but Jinwoo's ships cut through them with precisely aimed railgun fire. "Target the central coordination cluster," he called to his squadron. "That's where their quantum processors are located." The destroyers launched every missile they had at the prime node's core structure. Armor-piercing warheads detonated deep inside the entity's mechanical matrix, disrupting its control systems and causing cascading failures throughout the swarm. Sergeant Kang Haiwan led the first boarding party onto a partially disabled entity near the gas giant. Her mixed team of human and alien Marines fought their way through the creature's mechanical interior, using explosive charges to destroy critical systems. "These things are like living machines," she reported over the tactical network. "But they're vulnerable to physical damage once you get inside." The battle raged for hours as the human fleet traded losses with the entity swarm. The aliens' crude kinetic weapons proved effective, but difficult to operate under combat conditions. Several converted ships were destroyed when their crews couldn't reload or maintain their improvised weapons fast enough. Dr. Kim Soo-young monitored the battle from Nexus 7, analyzing the sensor data and providing tactical intelligence to Admiral Nam. "The prime node is adapting," she warned. "It's redistributing its control functions to avoid concentrated damage." "Then we hit it everywhere at once," Admiral Nam decided. "All ships, coordinate fire on my mark. Every weapon, every missile, all at the same target." The final assault began with a synchronized barrage from every surviving ship in the fleet. Human vessels fired their main railguns, while converted alien ships added their projectile weapons to the attack. Thousands of kinetic rounds converged on the prime node simultaneously. Engineer Choi Min-ho had one final surprise for the enemy. During the battle preparation, he had modified the gas giant mining stations to serve as massive kinetic weapons. "Admiral, the planetary mining equipment is ready to fire." "Do it!" Admiral Nam ordered. The mining stations, designed to extract resources from gas giant atmospheres, fired enormous metal projectiles at the prime node. Each projectile was the size of a small building, accelerated to tremendous velocity by electromagnetic launchers. The combined assault overwhelmed the prime node's defenses. The massive entity began to collapse as its control systems failed, and the dimensional distortions that held it together started to break down. Communications Officer Han Ji-sung detected the moment of victory. "Sir, the entity coordination network is failing. They're losing synchronization." Across the battlefield, the mechanical invaders began to behave erratically. Without the prime node's controlling influence, they reverted to individual operation and lost their tactical coordination. Captain Donghae seized the opportunity. "All ships, finish them off. They're vulnerable now." The human fleet pressed their attack, systematically destroying the confused entities with concentrated kinetic fire. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable just hours before were now easy targets for precisely aimed projectile weapons. As the last entity was destroyed, Admiral Nam allowed himself a moment of relief. The immediate threat was over, but he knew this was just one battle in a larger war. "Damage report," he called. "We've lost 43 ships and over 2,000 crew members," his tactical officer reported. "But the entity swarm is completely eliminated." Dr. Yoon Tae-hyun's analysis from the archaeological data proved correct. With the prime node destroyed, the remaining entities had been unable to maintain their exotic matter cohesion and had collapsed into basic particles. "Admiral," Dr. Kim's voice came through the communication system. "Long-range sensors are detecting more entity swarms throughout the galaxy. This was just the advance force." Admiral Nam looked at his battered fleet and the wreckage floating in space around them. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The galaxy would need every kinetic weapon they could build, and every species would have to learn the value of humanity's obsolete technology. "Set course for Nexus 7, he ordered. "We have work to do." The Battle of Kepler 452 had proven that the entities could be defeated, but only with kinetic weapons and the tactical knowledge that humanity had preserved. The galaxy's survival depended on learning the lessons that the progenitors had discovered. Too late. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and advanced doesn't always mean better. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 452, the Great Assembly Hall of Nexus 7 looked completely different. The elegant curved walls now displayed tactical maps showing entity incursions throughout the galaxy. Weapon racks lined the corridors, filled with kinetic rifles and projectile launchers. The station had been transformed from a diplomatic center into a military command post. Dr. Kim Soo-young stood before the assembled council, presenting her complete research on the entity threat. Her findings had taken months to compile, combining progenitor records with data from recent battles across dozens of star systems. "The entities are not invaders," she explained to the gathered representatives. "They are a security system, designed by an unknown ancient civilization to prevent any single species from dominating the galaxy." High Counselor Mordak's gas form swirled with confused patterns. "A security system? But they destroy entire civilizations." "Only civilizations that follow a specific technological path," Dr. Kim continued. "Species that abandon kinetic weapons in favor of pure energy systems trigger the entity's activation protocols. They're essentially a cosmic reset button." Dr. Yoon Tae-hyun activated a holographic timeline showing galactic history. The pattern repeats every 50,000 years. A species achieves advanced energy weapons, spreads across multiple star systems, and then the entities emerge to eliminate them. "The progenitors were not the first," he added. "We found evidence of at least 7 previous cycles. Each time the dominant species was destroyed because they had no defense against entities immune to energy weapons." Ambassador Vexithera's crystalline form flickered with distressed light patterns. "But energy weapons are more advanced, more efficient. Why would any species maintain primitive kinetic systems?" Captain Lee Donghae stepped forward to answer. "Because someone who built this security system was smart enough to know that advancement isn't always improvement. They wanted to ensure that any species capable of galactic domination would maintain the ability to fight physical threats." Lieutenant Park Jin-woo had been promoted to colonel after his heroic actions during the Entity War. He now served as the galaxy's chief military advisor, helping alien species adapt to kinetic warfare. "The entities test more than just weapons technology," he explained. "They test adaptability, tactical thinking, and the wisdom to maintain diverse capabilities. Species that put all their trust in one type of technology fail the test. Engineer. Choi Minho had become the galaxy's leading expert on kinetic weapon design. His workshops on Nexus 7 produced thousands of projectile weapons every day, arming the fleets of species that had never used such devices. "We're not just building guns," he told a group of alien engineers. "We're rebuilding an entire military philosophy. Energy weapons made warfare too easy, too clean. Kinetic weapons require skill, maintenance, and understanding of basic physics." The transformation of galactic society had been remarkable. Species that had looked down on humanity's primitive technology now begged for instruction in projectile warfare. Military academies throughout the galaxy taught courses in ballistics, trajectory calculation, and ammunition management. Weapons specialist Oh Myung ran the largest training facility, where alien soldiers learned to use rifles, pistols, and explosive devices. The learning curve was steep for species accustomed to point-and-shoot energy weapons. "Kinetic weapons require respect," she explained to a class of insectoid marines. "You must understand your ammunition supply, your weapons capabilities, and the physics of every shot. There are no computer-assisted targeting systems to help you." Communications Officer Han Ji-sung, now promoted to Intelligence Director, coordinated the galaxy-wide network that monitored for entity incursions. His teams had identified the warning signs that preceded entity activation, species achieving pure energy weapon technology, abandoning kinetic systems, and displaying technological arrogance. "We've prevented 3 potential entity activations," he reported to Admiral Nam Yoongi during their weekly briefing. "The Vextar Empire was about to decommission their last kinetic weapons when we intervened. The Mordan Collective was planning to convert all their ships to pure energy systems." Admiral Nam had been appointed Supreme Military Commander of the Galactic Defense Force, the first human to hold such a position. His primary mission was ensuring that no species ever again became completely dependent on energy weapons. "The hardest part isn't teaching them to use kinetic weapons," he reflected to Captain Dong-hae. "It's convincing them that maintaining obsolete technology is a form of wisdom, not backwardness." The Council had officially recognized humanity as the galaxy's protectors and weapons experts. The species that had once mocked human technology now relied on human knowledge for their survival. High Counselor Mordak made a formal apology during a special ceremony. "We failed to understand that complexity is not always superiority. Humanity's adherence to simple, reliable technology saved not just their own species, but all of galactic civilization." Dr. Kim had uncovered the final piece of the puzzle in the deepest progenitor archives. The ancient species had discovered the entity's true purpose before their destruction, and they had left a message for any future civilization wise enough to find it. The builders of the security system wanted to ensure that galactic civilization would always include species capable of physical conflict, she read from the translated text. They understood that pure energy-based warfare leads to stagnation and weakness. Only species that maintain kinetic weapons possess the adaptability to face unknown threats. "The entities are not our enemy," Dr. Yoon added. "They are our teachers. They force us to maintain capabilities we might otherwise abandon." Sergeant Kang Haiyuan, now General Kang, commanded the galaxy's first integrated kinetic warfare unit. Her forces included soldiers from dozens of species, all trained in the human military traditions of adaptability and resourcefulness. "We're not just preparing for the next entity incursion," she explained to her officers. "We're preparing for whatever unknown threat might emerge in the future. The entities taught us that specialization is vulnerability. The final session of the Council's emergency assembly focused on the future. With the immediate entity threat contained, the galaxy had to decide how to structure its defenses for the long term. We proposed the establishment of the Kinetic Warfare Preservation Protocol, Captain Donghae announced. Every member species must maintain a minimum percentage of kinetic weapons in their military forces. No civilization may become completely dependent on energy weapons. The proposal was unanimously approved, with humanity designated as the oversight authority. It was a remarkable reversal from their original status as the galaxy's most primitive members. As the assembly concluded, Dr. Kim reflected on how much had changed since their first arrival at Nexus 7. Humanity had gone from being dismissed as backward primitives to being recognized as the galaxy's saviors. The aliens finally understand, she told Dr. Yoon as they watched mixed-species training exercises through the station's viewing ports. Sometimes the old ways survive because they work better than the new ways. Lieutenant Park Jinwoo, now wearing the insignia of a Galactic Defense Force colonel, checked his sidearm one final time. The same projectile pistol that had been mocked as primitive now represented the difference between survival and extinction. The galaxy had learned its lesson, but the knowledge came at a terrible cost. Millions had died in the entity war. Entire star systems had been consumed, and advanced civilizations had been reduced to refugees. But they had survived, and they had learned. The next time the entities emerged from deep space, they would find a galaxy prepared for their test. Every species would carry kinetic weapons alongside their energy systems, and every military would train for physical combat as well as technological warfare. Humanity's stubborn refusal to abandon obsolete technology had saved galactic civilization, and their primitive weapons had become the foundation of a new military philosophy that would endure for millennia. The day the aliens learned why humans still used obsolete weapons had become the day the galaxy learned wisdom.